Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Emma Storey-Gordon with me to talk about menopause. Emma, welcome to the podcast, and thank you very much for taking the time for this.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very excited to be here.
As I was telling you off air, I really look up to you, and I'm very excited to have you here. However, not everybody who's listening might be aware of who you are. So as I ask all of my guests, I'd like to know who you are, what you do, and why you're so awesome at it.
So my name's Emma. I am first and foremost a coach, and I work primarily with menopausal women now. So I've worked with over 8,000 menopausal women on group coaching programs, on one-to-one coaching, on a bit of a hybrid of both. So I'm getting pretty good at it, and I've listened to a lot of women. I think that's the other thing, is not just I've educated myself about menopause and the process of it, and I also teach this on EIQ Nutrition, which is the nutrition course that I wrote with my business partner Amelia. But more to the point, I think I've definitely learned more just from working with a lot of women and listening to them and listening to the support that they need or that they want or that they found most useful, and the symptoms that they're struggling with, and helping them deal with those things. So I'd say most of my coaching skills have come from coaching. I think you can only learn so much from a textbook, and then the rest is okay, how do we apply this? And that might be the theory, but what's the application to it? So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. I also, as I said, run an education course for personal trainers called EIQ Nutrition. And then I also run a business mentorship that essentially takes excellent coaches who aren't very good at the business side, or who maybe don't market themselves as well as they could, and help them build businesses and impact more people.
Excellent introduction. Thank you for explaining. And that's exactly why I wanted you on this podcast, because you have a very deep and detailed understanding of the science, but you also have a lot of practical experience as a coach. And I am sure that you're going to bring a lot of value to this particular episode. So I think that a good place to start would be with definitions, so that everybody is on the same page. So could you please define the 4 stages of menopause?
Okay, so you have premenopause, which is anywhere from when you start menstruating until you start experiencing symptoms of perimenopause and the estrogen fluctuations that come with that. Then you have a period of perimenopause. This tends to be the hardest period for women. It's when symptoms are highest. And then you have menopause, which actually is just a point in time. So menopause is technically defined as not having had your menstrual cycle for 1 year. So really it is a distinct point in time. And then anywhere after that, you're postmenopausal. Now, the important point to make about that is that women now spend, because of life expectancy increases and the amazing things that we've been able to do with medicine, about a third of their life postmenopausal. So it's really quite important that we know the impact that has on the body, and to mitigate any of the negatives that might come with living for a longer period of time post-menopause, and keeping quality of life and health as high as possible during that time.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you said that menopause is really a point in time, and it's about a year of you not having a period, after which you spend the rest of your life post-menopausal. Now, you also mentioned that the perimenopausal stage, immediately preceding menopause, is when people tend to experience the majority of the symptoms. Now, when does the perimenopausal state usually have its onset? Around what age, if you know?
Yeah, it's usually between about 45 and 55 that people will experience like perimenopause.
Okay. And what kind of symptoms do people usually present with? And what is the cause? What's happening inside the body that might be
So,
causing that?
yeah, all of these symptoms are basically due to the fluctuation in hormones that's happening within the body, primarily estrogen. There are other things going on, but for like the this to keep it relatively simple, it's the fluctuation in estrogen that's causing most of the symptoms that women struggle with. Now, the kind of annoying thing about estrogen is there are receptors all over your body, right? So you have estrogen receptors in your brain, in your heart, in your liver, in your bones, in your skin, in your joints, in your muscles, in your bowel, in your nerves, in your bladder, in your vagina, which means that you can have symptoms in any or all of these places, which means that the symptoms are quite vast, right? So the most commonly spoken about symptoms tend to be hot flashes or night sweats, reduced sleep quality, potentially because of that, reduced libido, vaginal dryness, mood changes, increases in anxiety and depression. Also, if you've ever struggled with things like to do with your mental health, it's much more likely to kind of reoccur and come back up. So, things again like anxiety, depression. It's also a time when, interestingly, more recently, many women get diagnosed with ADHD because those symptoms get harder to mask.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's quite a lot to do with mental health and mood, poor concentration. Some women have heart palpitations, joint pain, muscle. Like, I mean, I get these are more chronic things, but like other things that are important in terms of how we coach women going through menopause are things like muscle loss, loss of bone mineral density, increases in body fat, and then the redistribution of that body fat as well to places. So, what tends to happen is that women redistribute body fat to the middle, which is traditionally more like how men store body fat. So most women are like quote unquote pear shaped, right? Crude analogies, but like go with me on this. Most women are kind of pear shaped, which means they store more body fat around their hips and their lower body, or more peripherally. So like some people might call it like bingo wings, right? Or bigger thighs, bigger bum. That's actually quite a good thing because it's a safe space to store body fat. It's not near your organs, and actually, the problem with having a lot of body fat is when fat cells become stretched and inflamed and start releasing things that are going to have a negative impact on your metabolism as a whole and cause things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, or at least increase the risk of these things. Now, we know that if you store fat more centrally and you have more visceral fat around those organs, that you have a higher chance of these problems occurring. This is one of the reasons that men experience more cardiovascular disease than women, because generally we store fat in a different place than men. So this is kind of besides the point, but it's not just how much fat you have that is a predictor of your health, but where you store body fat. And what's quite interesting about this is that, as an example, for South Asians who tend to store more body fat peripherally, you can have a much lower body fat and still have this elevated risk of things like cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, which is why we see the higher rates in that population compared to someone who is Caucasian, for example, might have even higher body fat levels than that, but not experience those same problems. So it's certainly not fair, but that's just an example of like, it's not just how much fat you have, but where it is. So when we
Mm-hmm.
see menopausal women redistribute body fat more peripherally, that's also increasing their risk of these diseases. So we want to obviously reduce the amount of body fat that they have in those areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, on the topic of fat gain and fat loss, I think this is a good segue into talking about how menopause can affect fat loss specifically, because I believe that in this area, there's quite a bit of misinformation, perhaps. So, for example, I'd like to discuss as far as you know, does menopause cause fat gain by some mechanism that's not really under our specific control, or are there other reasons why we could see an increase in body fat around this time?
So, yes and no. As in, some people will say, and like as a blanket statement, like menopause causes fat gain. And it's not quite as simple as that. So, to get really sort of sciencey, or to give both sides of the argument completely, there may be a small reduction in metabolic rate with the reduction in estrogen that you see during menopause. Now, if you A, resistance train, and B, take HRT, this is mitigated, right? So it wouldn't be
Hmm.
applicable to both of those things. If you don't and you experience loss of muscle mass and lower estrogen levels, what can happen is your basal metabolic rate, so your resting metabolic rate, can reduce slightly. Now, of the research I've seen, this is less than 100 calories a day, right? So it's certainly not like the reason that people are putting on loads of body fat. The reason that people are putting on body fat during menopause is because the symptoms, right? And it's sometimes hard to get your head around because it can feel like nothing has changed, but you're now starting to store body fat. But when you think about all that you're going through, like even if we just looked at sleep, like, if we know that if people have reduced sleep quality or reduced sleep time, they are way more hungry. In fact, studies show that if you don't, um, well, actually, studies show that people who have, I think it was 4 hours sleep compared to 8 hours sleep the next day, ate something like, on average, 500 calories more, right? And that has a huge impact. Obviously, that would be probably someone's whole deficit. Now, if you were eating at maintenance and you started eating 500 calories more a day, over time, you're certainly going to start putting on body fat, right? So a
Yeah.
lot of these, and that's an extreme example, right? But what I see a lot with women I work with who tend to come to me saying, nothing has changed. Now I think I'm perimenopausal and I'm putting on fat and I don't know why, because I'm doing all the same things. What tends to have happened is what I term like a bit of a behavioral drift. So nothing drastic has changed, and you'll notice this with symptoms as well. They tend not to come on overnight. Like, it's not like you go from having amazing night's sleep to just suddenly not sleeping at all, or like having, I don't know, really good mood to suddenly the next day being depressed. Like, it happens over time. So that means that it's less noticeable and your behaviors can sort of start to drift. So you eat a little bit more, you move a little bit less, and it doesn't seem like anything has changed. But actually, it's the compounding effect of those small changes that starts to add up. And then you're like, wait, now I've put on quite a lot of fat and I don't feel like I've changed anything. So what's going on? So when anyone asks me, like, is fat loss harder during menopause? Like, some people will be like, no, it's exactly the same. And they're right in that the mechanism is the same. If you are in a calorie deficit, whether you're menopausal or not, you will lose body fat. Now, how hard it is to create that calorie deficit changes drastically, right? It's much like saying it's just as easy to walk down the street as it is to walk up Mount Everest. Like, it's still putting one foot in front of the other. So the process is the same, right? But like, one of them is significantly harder. And it's kind of the same with menopause. It's like fat loss is the same. You still have to create a calorie deficit, but it's much harder than it was before. So, and I think some people, when you tell them that it's the same process, feel like you're saying it's just as easy, just do the same thing. And that's certainly
Hmm.
not what any decent coach is saying. So you might need a bit more support. But I think it's important to remind yourself that it is the same, mainly so you don't, and you kind of alluded to this, like, there is a lot of shit out there about how to lose fat as a menopausal woman. Like, you'll be able to find something that says you should eat 8 meals a day, and something else that says you should only eat 1 meal a day and you should fast and you should only eat between 6 and 7 p.m. at night or whatever. Like, there's crazy shit out there and you'll find completely conflicting advice. So then you're like, what the hell do I do? And actually, it's the same stuff. It's the same sensible approach. It's just that you might need to make slight tweaks in how you apply that to make sure that you can actually stick to that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I kind of think about it as as a transition in life, similar to the transition from when you're a uni student and you're walking everywhere. You have all the time in the world to exercise, and then you transition into a 9 to 5 job. maybe you work even more than the standard 9 to 5. So you work 50 hours per week. All of a sudden, you've got other responsibilities, you have a family, and you don't have time for exercise, and you're thinking, wow, I'm putting on weight, but I haven't changed anything. Everything has changed.
Yeah, exactly. It's very similar. And actually, even to kind of add to that, what compounds with that is a lot of the time of menopause or perimenopause, so from like 45 to 55, is also quite a big time for women in their life. So you might be like just at the peak of your career. So you've got the most stress, or the most, like, maybe you're a manager now, or you're, higher up in whatever it is that you're doing. So there's that element from a work perspective. A lot of women at that age have kids that are maybe still at home or about to leave home. To add to that, they usually have aging parents who also need their support. And you've kind of got, and now you're going through something as well. So it's like there's a lot on this individual. And like you
Hmm.
just said, with you might think, oh, like, I'm doing the same thing I was as a student. It's like you had no dependence. You barely, like, looking back now, I remember thinking I was stressed when I had an exam, and it was like, you literally have nothing to do apart from just rock up to this exam that you need to get 40% to pass. Like, what are you stressed about? And you've got all the time in the world to study for it. Like, it was quite ridiculous to think that that I thought I was stressed at that time. But anyway, um, yeah, life changes, right?
And I think it's quite empowering to know that the mechanistic process is still the same, and that what has changed is the rest of your life, your stress levels, your sleep, the symptoms that you may be experiencing. But that ultimately, to a certain extent, these are things that you can control because you can still change your behaviors to accomplish fat loss. Because what I don't like about the misinformation on the internet about menopause is that when you're told it's your cortisol is so high around menopause that you're not going to be able to lose fat. Well, what's somebody supposed to do about that?
Yeah, and that's the point. Or when people say a side effect of menopause is weight gain, as if like there's nothing you can do about it. And you're exactly right. Like, it should be quite comforting that, hey, it might be harder, but it is the same principles. It does still work. You are still completely capable. But it doesn't help when there's, like, even sometimes doctors in your ear saying, "Don't worry about it. It's a symptom of menopause is weight gain." It's not an inevitability. It doesn't have to be a symptom. And if you want to live a long, healthy, high quality of life, then you want to make sure that you're looking after yourself at that time is the most important time to be doing it. So yeah, I think it's very disempowering to take that away from someone and be like, well, it's just, this is just what happens as you age. Bullshit. Doesn't have to happen to everybody. And then what was the other point you made that I thought was really good? Oh, the cortisol thing. Yeah. Like, if you tell someone who's stressed that the reason that they're not losing fat is because their cortisol's high because they're stressed, but their life isn't just going to magically change and have no stress in it, then what are you meant to do? And you're basically saying that's out with your control. So now what do you do? And then what tends to happen is you end up giving up, because if someone told me, hey, as you age, you'll put on fat, that's what happens. Why would I fight that? Like, it's out of my control. I'm going to age. So if I can't stop aging, and when I age, I'm going to put on fat, what's the point me even trying? And then what happens is you don't try, and then you do put
Hmm.
on fat. And then you're like, see, as you age, you put on fat, or as you go through menopause, you put on fat. And then it becomes like a kind of self fulfilling prophecy, instead of empowering people to, hey, actually, what we do know, what the research does show is that as most people, as the average person ages, they put on weight. You're not average. You don't have to be average. This is what I always tell my clients. It's like, if you want to be average, like, look at the average person in the UK in all aspects. It's like that the average person is overweight. The average marriage ends in divorce. The average person has something like less than £1,000 of savings in their bank. Like, then when I talk to people about, like, oh, someone said something about me bringing in, I don't know, some prepped food when everyone else was having sandwiches in the office or something like that, I'm like, good, because that's what the average person does, right? And you don't want to be average. Like, if you don't want that result. Like, people will probably look at you different and be like, why is it that you get up at 7 every morning so you can go to the gym before work? It's like, because I don't want an average life, right? So I fully accept that I will have to do actions that mean that, yeah, it's not the norm. Inherently, it's not the norm because I don't want the normal outcome. And once you accept that and you see it as like a bit more of a positive, and by the way, it doesn't mean you have to make a big deal out of it. You don't have to tell everyone that you're getting up at 7. If you don't want comments about it, don't make a big deal out of it. Just do it quietly on your own. If you know in your head, hey, like, this is, if I behave like everybody else, that's the outcome I'm going to get. And I don't want that outcome. So you're going to have to change your behaviors.
I love that point that you made, because I think that something that, or at least I don't think so, my clients often will tell me, so many clients have told me, oh, I struggle to change what I eat or choose something different than everybody else when we eat out because people make comments. And if you can reframe it in your mind as, well, if I'm getting comments, it's because I'm not average, and that's a good thing. I really love that idea. So thank you for sharing that thought.
Good.
Okay. So speaking of fat loss, then circling back there. So if the mechanism is the same, then in terms of nutrition and lifestyle, we have the same mechanism. We need to create a calorie deficit. At this stage in life, is there any nutritional or lifestyle or mindset-based recommendation that you would specifically make to people going through menopause to make it easier to navigate a calorie deficit?
I think one of the things is that if you're struggling a lot with symptoms, it can feel like what you used to do is really hard. And then you have this kind of perfectionist mindset of, I can't do that, so I may as well do nothing. Instead of thinking, I'm going to do something. And this is, and sometimes people are like, yeah, but that's not going to get me the same result. Wait, because it will. Essentially, what you need to do is get yourself out of the rut that you're in. So, the one thing that we know from all the research is diet and exercise improve symptoms. In fact, it's got the strongest evidence of things that improve symptoms is improving your diet and exercise, right? Now, if you try and go from 0 to 100, you won't be able to stick to it. But if you're like, right, maybe the first thing, maybe you've really been struggling with symptoms, right? And the first thing you need to do is just get out for a 10-minute walk every day. Now, as soon as that starts to make you feel a little bit better, I'm not saying it's going to cure all your symptoms, but you start to get a little bit of benefit from that. Okay, can we make that a 15-minute walk? Okay, great. Now, can we add in a little morning routine that has a few squats and a few press ups in it? Okay, great. Then you start to feel the benefit of that. And then you compound this and you start to add a little bit more and more and more in until you actually are doing quite a lot and you actually are getting really good results. But I think what people struggle with is they're like, I need to do that end result or, that perfect plan to get results. And they don't realize they need to kind of, they can't just jump up 10 flights of stairs. They need to take one step at a time. And then as you start to feel better, you feel like you can do a little bit more. So I'd say that that's one of the biggest things is meeting people where they are and showing them the timeline of it as well, not just being like, all we're going to do is increase your step target by a couple of thousand steps. Like, that's not exciting. But with the goal of that'll make you feel a little bit better. Then we're going to add in the next thing. We're not going to overwhelm you. You're going to feel a bit better from that. And you'll be surprised at what you can then do. And then we're just going to build it up slowly. But I think it's important to show people that timeline as well. Otherwise, they don't fully buy into it. But that works extremely well. The other thing that I have found works very well is to do slightly shorter workouts. One of the reasons for this is that the drop in estrogen impacts your ability to recover from exercise. So what you want to do is, more frequent workouts that are a bit shorter, so you're better at recovering from them, rather than big workouts that are basically you're not going to be able to recover from, and then you end up burning out a little bit.
Okay, that makes sense. So when you say that the recovery is impacted, you mean the recovery from a single bout of exercise. So more frequent but shorter bouts seem to work better.
They seem to work better. I think it's partly to do with the mood and the endorphins as well. And this isn't something I necessarily do with menopausal women, but like sharing something that I do myself is I fully know that the way that I train isn't optimal for building muscle, but it's optimal for my life and what I want to get out of exercise. Now, a huge reason that I exercise is to improve mood. So I want to do it more frequently, which means I can't do as longer sessions because I won't recover from them, right? And also I don't have time for that, right? Like, I've got more important shit to do than spend hours and hours in the gym. But
Okay.
I tend to do like 20 to 30-minute sessions 6 days a week because I want the increase in concentration. I want the endorphin rush. I want the focus that comes with me starting my day with exercise. So if you want to do that and those outcomes are more important to you than like optimizing building muscle, then you might want to work out more frequently. It depends why you're exercising, what benefits you want to get from them. When it comes specifically to menopausal women, actually, what's going on a muscular level changes slightly. So if you have this reduction in anabolic hormones, estrogen and testosterone that happens during menopause, you also have this change in your ability to activate satellite cells within your muscle and then build more muscle. Um, Along with a few other things like a dampened response to muscle protein synthesis, it essentially makes it a little bit harder to build muscle. This is one of the reasons that menopausal women will experience a reduction in muscle mass if they don't resistance train.
Hmm.
So sometimes people can get that in their head and think, oh, well, if it's harder to build muscle, what's the point trying? And I know this is like hard to get your head around, but it's more important that you try because you're predisposed to losing muscle, and the best way to avoid losing muscle is to try and build muscle and to stimulate that muscle. So yeah, you do have a situation, a hormonal situation that is less quote unquote anabolic, so like friendly to build muscle when you're menopausal. That is mitigated if you take HRT. Because obviously you're replacing some of the hormones. A lot of women take both estrogen and testosterone, so you're replacing the hormones that have created that environment that makes it harder to build muscle.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, um, it might be that some people think that, or at least many people who are not super familiar with they're not in the fitness industry, they are exercisers, like they like exercising, they like to look after themselves, but they might think that the pursuit of build of muscle growth is a goal that people have purely for aesthetic purposes. So what I'd like would be for you to touch upon why it is so important to build muscle aside from the physical appearance changes that you can get.
Mhm. I mean, muscle is your most protective mechanism against like all negative health outcomes as you age. So like osteopenia, sarcopenia, metabolic complications like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, like there is a direct correlation between the amount of muscle mass you have and your health and actually what they term all cause mortality. So like dying of any cause. The more muscle you have, they actually did quite a cool study that linked how many press ups someone can do with how long they'll live, right? And there's this correlation which works really nicely. But it's so important for health. And I think you're right. I think we're getting the message across a little bit better, but it does. I think there is still this like, well, that I'm not a bodybuilder. Why do I care about building muscle? And
Hmm.
it could not be more important. Even in terms of just your, when I say quality of life, I mean like how long you can live on your own without relying on someone else. And I know that for some people, and we do have this kind of cognitive dissonance that your future self doesn't seem like yourself, right? So now if I'm like, oh, I'm one of the reasons that people don't like invest in a pension or take care of their health now for their future self is because they see their future self as a stranger. So if I'm like, oh, it's really important for me to put away for my pension, but actually I see my 70-year-old self as somebody else, like I can't even envision that's me, I'm way less likely to do that. And most people do envision that. But knowing that kind of helps with that cognitive bias of like, I can't see that, but like it is you. And you will be grateful that you're essentially paying into your health pension. And there's nothing more important. Like if you don't have your health, you've got nothing. It doesn't matter how much money you've got in the bank. Like, if you've not got your health, like, it's irrelevant, right? So it is the most important thing. And what's hard about it is it's often only when it's gone that we realize that. You know, like, the value of something when you have it is like, everybody does this, right? I completely take my health for granted until it's gone. And then you're like, oh my God, like, nothing matters apart from that. And anyone who's had a health scare or a serious injury or anything will know exactly what I mean. Like, even on like a much smaller scale, you know, when you can breathe through your nose and you just take it like every day, you take it for granted, and then you get a cold and you're like, this is like so fucking annoying that I can't even breathe through my. But yeah, you normally just take that for granted, right? And then for about half a day after you get that back, after you've had a cold, you're like, this is the best feeling in the world. I can't, you know,
Yes.
so great. And then it becomes the norm again. But that on a much larger scale with, like, you know, when do you want to go into a nursing home? Do you want it to be, because you could change that by 10 years by actually resistance training consistently. And it doesn't have to be, I think still when people hear resistance training or lifting weights, they're like, oh, big, muscly, steroid men in the gym. I don't want to be that. And that's a complete misconception. Like, it doesn't have to be that. And you can resistance train at home. Like, a lot of the benefits, especially as a woman, you can resistance train really well at home if you want. You don't have to go to a gym. You don't need loads of fancy equipment. In fact, your own body weight is often enough to stimulate significant muscle growth. And I say especially as a woman because we tend to be less strong compared to body weight. And like, we know that in lockdown, obviously everyone was working out at home, and I got some really good results with women, partly because you can overload that muscle quite quickly with bodyweight exercises. And actually some people found them much harder than when they were at the gym. Like, as an example, doing a push-up as a woman is much harder than doing, like, I don't know, if you go to the gym, you do your 8 kilogram dumbbell press or something, actually pushing up your body weight is a harder movement. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big scary gym workout. Like, actually doing anything that's applying resistance is really beneficial.
Thank you for explaining that. So resistance training, clearly very important. Also, something that I've noticed, that it's a message that comes along with the message of cortisol will stop you from losing fat. So you can't do anything that will spike your cortisol. What goes hand in hand with that, I've noticed, is the idea that at this stage in one's life, you need to avoid high intensity exercise like HIIT or even cardio, because it could increase your cortisol levels. What are your thoughts on cardio at both a moderate intensity and a higher intensity?
So HIIT training is one of the best things that you can possibly do for your health. And I think it's ridiculous that people are saying not to do it. And I see this given a lot to women who have PCOS as well, and it drives me mad. I'm like, if there's a population of people who could benefit the most from HIIT training, it's potentially women with PCOS. So what are the side effects? Not everyone with PCOS has this, but often is a reduction in insulin sensitivity. The best thing you can do for that is HIIT training. That will increase your insulin sensitivity in a very time efficient manner, even with a very small amount of exercise. Like, I used to research in this area. So one of the most interesting bits of research was this group that looked at essentially what's the least you can do to see this benefit. And they found that 2 5-second bouts of exercise will increase insulin sensitivity, which is mad, right? And it's mainly because you're pushing yourself so far out of your homeostatic range, so like your resting state, in such a short period of time, your body has to adapt to that, and it increases your sensitivity to insulin. So the reason that I think, or the confusion that I think people get, and this goes for most hormones, is that people see things as like good or bad, right? So like cortisol is bad. It's not bad. Chronically high levels of cortisol are bad, right? Much in the same way that people will be like, insulin is bad. No, insulin is required, is very important, and is essential. That's why type 1 diabetics have to inject it if they don't produce their own, or they don't produce enough. It's bad in chronically elevated amounts, right? So it's the same kind of principle. Actually, the cortisol response from exercise isn't a negative. it stimulates some of the adaptations to exercise, so it is required, it is important, it is a good thing. You just don't want chronically elevated levels of it, which really has nothing to do with the acute elevation, especially not from exercise. So if you're thinking like, I should avoid exercise for the cortisol spike, like that is complete rubbish. And absolutely do not listen to anyone that's saying that. They have absolutely no understanding of like human physiology. The only reason that I would suggest that is with someone who has hypothalamic amenorrhea. I might avoid things like HIIT training or things that are going to increase stress levels because they're already in quite a stressed state, and we obviously want to reduce that so that they get their menstrual cycle back. But if you've got something like PCOS, now saying that, sometimes the two can be slightly confused. I'm not going to go on too much of a tangent here. If you are struggling with that, feel free to reach out to me. But sometimes with PCOS, you can have irregular cycles, so it might seem like you have amenorrhea, but you don't. And actually, HIIT training might help in that situation. So it's a little bit specific. But for the vast majority of people, HIIT training is amazing. And I think one of the benefits for it, and really like all of the health research behind it, is based on the fact that the number one reason that people give for not exercising is time. Like, I don't have an hour to go to the gym, so I'll do nothing. And we're like, okay, cool. Here's this like 20-minute thing that you can do that's going to have a huge impact. Okay, what's the excuse now? And then you kind of realize it wasn't time. But I do think there is still this narrative, and it's something I push against a lot, and it's why I talk a lot about how short my workouts are, that if you're not doing an hour, there's no point. Like, something is always better than like 5 minutes. You can actually do quite a good circuit in 5 minutes, and you can stimulate those muscles. And when you think more about the metabolic benefits of exercise, not how long you're doing it, it's actually stimulating that muscle that is active, it's being used, and you're making it more insulin sensitive, and you're drawing, like what happens on a muscular level when you stimulate muscle is that GLUT4 transporters, so the things that bring glucose out of the blood and into the muscle, are translocated to the cell surface, and that makes it more sensitive. And that's a really important metabolic health marker. Now, you don't need to do a lot of exercise to do that. Like, actually, you could do it in a 5-minute circuit.
Absolutely. The way I think about it is this: muscles don't look at clocks. They don't know that time is passing. Muscles sense stimulus. So once you cross the stimulus threshold for the goal that you want to achieve, your muscles are done. They don't care that it took an hour or 5 minutes.
Yeah, and it's same with when you look at like exercise selection. People are like, "Oh, I can't do squats, so what's the point?" I'm like, your quads don't know that you're doing a squat. Stimulate them in a different way. You want that muscle to grow, you want that muscle to be stimulated, do it in a different way. Get creative with it. Like, I don't squat anymore because of my back, but I still want to work my legs. Okay, so I use a different mode to do that. And yeah, it might be a little bit boring, but like, hey, that's the cards I've been dealt. Fine. I find a way around it.
Yeah, I was thinking about this actually, this narrative that you mentioned, where people think, well, unless it's 1 hour, 3 days per week, then it's pointless, or more, then it's pointless. When you were talking earlier about gradually building up from a 10-minute walk to a 15-minute walk and so on, because I think something that's hard to accept is that if you used to be much more active when you were younger, and now that even that 10-minute walk feels like, in the beginning, feels like it's really fatiguing for you and you need to build up from there. It can be hard to wrap your head around that, I feel. And then you've got the narrative where people tell you, oh, if you're not doing this much for this long, this many days per week, then what's the point to begin with? And I think this all compounds together into creating a disempowering mindset where, well, I'm too fatigued to do more than 10 minutes, but 10 minutes is worthless, so what's the point? And you end up not doing anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is why I talk a lot to clients about the law of diminishing returns. And I actually live my life quite heavily by that as well. So if you think about it, there's like 3 situations where I really apply this. One is exercise that we've already spoken about. You get the vast majority of the benefit of the exercise that you do from the first like 20 minutes. Now, I'm not saying you get none from the next 40 minutes that you do if you're doing an hour session, but it diminishes the longer that you go on. So that last 10 minutes of exercise that you're doing of your hour-long gym workout, honestly, it's not doing very much. So when I think about, okay, what are the pros and cons to spending the next 10 minutes exercising at the start, the first 10 minutes, pros way outweigh the cons, right? Of like essentially the opportunity cost of that time. What else could I be doing with that time? For me, that pro versus con of like opportunity cost of time kind of weighs out at about like 20 to 30 minutes. So I want to get the benefit. I'm getting the vast majority of the benefit. And then I'm like, actually, at this point, I'd rather be doing other stuff with my time. Fine. The other way to think about this is in a food situation. So you might be like, that first slice of pizza tastes amazing, brings me so much joy, and I enjoy it so much, and it's well worth spending a couple of hundred calories on. Second slice, same, getting loads of joy from it, like I'm really enjoying this, whatever. Third and fourth slice, you're like, I'm kind of a little bit full. I'm not enjoying it as much, but it's still costing me the same in terms of like the energy expenditure or like the calorie count of that. So by the fourth, you might be like, it's not worth it anymore. Like the law of diminishing returns, like I'm not getting as much enjoyment from this slice of pizza. And actually the pro in terms of enjoyment is now not outweighing the con in terms of actually now it's taking me away from my goal. So I choose to stop there, right? Another application of this law of diminishing returns. And then the third way that I use this as well is like with work, right? So everyone finds this, right? The first, I don't know, hour that you're sat in a coffee shop doing some work, you might get loads done. And then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna do another hour. I won't get half as much done in that second hour. So I'm like, is that still a good use of time? Now, sometimes it is, and I still have to just push through and be like, well, I need this stuff to get done. But I'm not getting as much done. Like the productivity level has dropped. So I'm not getting as much done per unit of time anymore. So I might decide actually it's a better use of my time to break up my day with going to the gym and then coming back because I'll be more productive, even in a smaller space of time. So I genuinely live my life on that kind of like law of diminishing returns graph of like, how am I spending my time? And without being too cheesy, like how you spend your time is how you spend your life. So, and more isn't always better. And I'm a big fan of like quality time, quality food, quality gym workouts, as opposed to quantity of everything. Like you can get the enjoyment of like I don't know, having a beer from half a pint instead of a full pint, but you've saved half your calories, right?
That's excellent, Emma. Thank you. I love that. I am really big on mindset, and I'm super happy that that's where the conversation landed. Taking it back to menopause specifically, I also wanted to get your thoughts on nutrition, and I'm wondering. Okay, so we established that the laws of thermodynamics still apply. So we want to create a calorie deficit if we want to lose body fat, or we want to stay at maintenance calories if the goal is to maintain. But then in terms of macronutrients and food quality, are there any specific recommendations that you think would apply in this phase of life?
Mm-hmm. Generally for everybody, the healthiest diet that we know of is the Mediterranean style diet. So it's not massively over restrictive. It's got some good, healthy, nutritious food, mostly whole food, minimizing ultra processed foods, not having too much meat, but not excluding it. Like it's quite an inclusive diet. That's what I would generally suggest. There's also some interesting research around the severity of symptoms and the amount of processed food that people eat. So with more food comes worse symptoms. This is observational, so it's not clear that because you could. Oh my god, I just got cramp. Sorry.
That's all right.
I've been sat down too long. I need to stand up.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Sorry about that. So you could argue that either way. You could argue that actually people who have worse symptoms are more likely to comfort eat, and you're more likely to comfort eat with processed foods. Or you could argue that the processed foods are causing worse symptoms. Now, we do know that people who have poorer like lifestyle traits like smoking, being overweight, more processed foods do experience worse symptoms. So you can kind of do with that what you will. And we know that one of the most evidence-based and a quote I love from a review paper on menopause treatments is that diet and exercise is the only non-controversial treatment that we have that we know works. So yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a correlation there. But yeah, I always like to caveat that stuff when it's observational data, that it's like, you know there's a link, but you don't know the causality of that link.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important to cover.
Yeah, I agree. And what about protein?
Yeah, so protein is always important, but even more important. And because what we were speaking about before about this reduced anabolic state, much
Mm-hmm.
like, and men experience this as well, like as you have this reduction in testosterone, it's harder to build muscle. So actually you'll benefit a lot more from a slightly higher protein intake. There's also some research that shows that menopausal women benefit slightly more from slightly higher supplementation of creatine as well. But with the protein intake, yeah, I would try and increase that. I almost say that sometimes with a bit of like getting older people to eat more protein is hard enough anyway. And sometimes if you set a target of like, oh, you used to struggle to get 100 grams. Well, now I want you to get like 130, 140 grams. It's quite hard to do. So anyway, like it is more important. And then interestingly on that point, so much of the research around eating protein after a workout has come from older people because they have this reduction in the anabolic window. So a lot of supplement companies used to play off this of like, hey, look, this one study shows that when older men drink protein either within an hour or like 3 hours later, the group that drink it within an hour get significantly more or higher rates of protein synthesis, and that will help them build more muscle. And then they extrapolate that out to healthy individuals who actually have quite a large anabolic window, and the timing of protein isn't half as important. So I would say that the amount and the timing as you age and as you have this reduction in anabolic signaling is more important. So thinking about like, am I getting in protein after my workout or even before? I think we've all like the trend's always been after, but if you actually technically look at how long it takes to digest protein, get the amino acids into the bloodstream, that peak with the stimulus of protein synthesis from exercise, you'd probably be better having it before. But this is like overthinking it now. But getting in protein within an hour, like of exercise, either side, much more important as you age.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Now, on the topic of carbohydrates and fat, something that also is very common is to demonize one to the other or both. And in the context of a change in life, like menopause, that becomes even more common to where you might hear messages like, oh, you can't eat carbs now because it's easier to put on fat after the menopause. So, what are your thoughts on that? Should somebody worry about either carbs, fats, or any particular food?
No, I mean, this would just be general advice for everyone. Like, I think if you're looking to improve your health and feel your best, which I think is like an underrated goal, like it's my goal around the way that I live now and the way that I diet and exercise, is like based on what's important to me. How do I feel my best, and how do I diet and exercise in a way that's going to help me? And like I've already spoken about the way that I exercise that isn't optimal to build muscle, but it's optimal for me to show up the way that I want to show up at work, which is important to me, and that's my primary focus at the moment. Or at work, or with family, or with my partner. Like I want to be in a good mood, I want to be focused, and I know that exercise will help me do that. To caveat that, I also kind of use it as a bit of like I have ADHD. So if I don't exercise in a day, I can tell that my symptoms are much worse and I have lower concentration, more irritable, etc., etc. Anyway, um, what was the question about? Should you cut out protein or carbohydrates?
The question was if somebody should worry about carbs, fats, or any particular food during, throughout any phase of menopause.
Yeah. So no, there are slight caveats. So, for example, if you don't want to take HRT or you can't take HRT, you might want to increase foods that have estrogen like properties
Mm.
in them. Now, this is literally like a splash in the ocean. If you're taking HRT, it'll make literally no difference whatsoever. But there are certain foods that mimic to an extent the impact of estrogen. That's quite a small subpopulation of people, because I would suggest that most people, if they can, obviously speak to a doctor about this, pros and cons, but do take HRT. And then if you're not taking it, there's often a reason not to take it. Now, if the reason that you're not taking HRT is that you have a high chance of estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, or you've had it previously, or there's some link there, then actually you wouldn't want to include these foods anyway. So always speak to your doctor about this, and don't just randomly take advice from people on the internet. But there's maybe a slight consideration there. But aside from that, like, it's the same healthy diet as you would have at any other point of life. You don't need to change anything. You don't need to cut carbs. You don't need to change your meal timings. And the last thing you should be doing is trying to make it harder when it's already hard. So if you're like, oh, this doesn't work at the moment, so I just slash my calories even more, and that's just going to trip you up. Or I'm just going to cut out all the foods that I enjoy, or all carbohydrates. Like, no. We need to make this as easy as possible for you, because you're dealing with other stuff as well. And that's what's going to get you the best results.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you, Emma. The very last question I have before we wrap up is, since we've spoken about all of the macronutrients and diet in general, there's also a lot of potentially misleading marketing claims regarding supplements for menopause. So I'm wondering if you have any that you recommend, and what are your thoughts basically on supplementation in this phase of life?
There is almost no evidence for any of the supplement claims being made. So the only supplements that I recommend are ones that I recommend generally anyway. So things like vitamin D becomes more important because you might experience bone mineral density loss. Things like creatine, even more important, and actually has been shown to help with brain fog. Protein, because it's hard to get in protein, and as we just said, we'd like you to get in even more if possible. But aside from that, unless you're deficient in something in your diet, which is really what supplements should be used for, hence supplement, like, you really want to be focused, what's the best diet I can have? Most people go to supplements way too quickly, and actually they don't have much impact. The only caveat I will give to this is that the placebo effect is massive. Like, one study on menopausal women showed that the treatment, so the placebo arm of an HRT treatment study experienced a 50% reduction in symptoms. So they got nothing. They thought they might be getting HRT. Now, remember that this is like a blinded study, so half the group would get HRT, half the group wouldn't. The group that didn't get HRT experienced a 50% reduction in symptoms because they thought they were getting HRT. You cannot underestimate the impact of a placebo. So if someone's taking, I don't know, goat's hoof something, black whatever, blah blah blah, and it's not costing them an arm and a leg and it's getting them results, I'm fine with it, apart from I hate misinformation. Like, I'm fine with it as long as some celebrity's not making a fucking fortune off it, misleading loads of women who feel really desperate. So it's kind of like, it's a conflicting thing in my head a lot of the time. I'm like, if someone's getting a benefit from it, do I want to tell them that there's no evidence behind it and it's not costing them loads and they feel good with it? Then fine, but there really is no strong evidence behind anything apart from the basics.
Now you've basically ruined the placebo effect for all the listeners, but I guess we'll have to take that.
Well, do you know what's interesting is, even though you'd think that I guess people still get a placebo effect even if they know that the treatment isn't active. It's mad. Like, the placebo stuff is mad. If anyone's interested in this, this book blew my mind. It's called The Expectation Effect. One of the best books I've ever read. And it's just so fascinating. It's basically like your expectation of anything and how it impacts the reality. Really interesting with dieting, and it actually changed a lot of the way that I coach. So a lot of what I focus on now is like your mental preparation for dieting, mainly because there's so much evidence to show that even if you're not actually in a deficit, but you perceive that you're on a diet, you experience more hunger, right? So like
Yeah.
one of my favorite studies is this study where they give everyone an omelette, and it's the same omelette for everyone, but half the group get a menu that says it's a 3-egg omelette, and half the group get a menu that half the group get a menu that say it's a 2-egg omelette, half the group get a menu that say it's a 4-egg omelette, but actually it's a 3-egg omelette for everyone. Now, the people who think that they've consumed 4 eggs eat significantly less for the rest of the day. The people that think that they've consumed 2 eat significantly more, and they experience more hunger, not just from a psychological perspective, but from a ghrelin perspective, so a hunger hormone in your blood, from your perception. And then they've repeated this in numerous other studies. Like, one of the most famous ones is the milkshake study, where
Yes.
the same milkshake, but they've labeled it differently. And the real kicker here is that when you think you have consumed an indulgent milkshake, you have significantly lower hunger hormone levels than if you think that you've consumed like a Slim Fast shake or something. So it's not just like, because I kind of understand the perception part. I'm like, yeah, cool. You think that you've consumed more, so you think you're going to be more full. Not that impactful. But when it's like on a hormonal level, like your blood levels, that's mad to me. It's like, wow, your physiology can change based on what you think is happening. So then that really translates to me for coaching of like making sure people feel like they are choosing to diet, not that they have to, that they're not restricted on a diet, that they're making choices in line with their goals. Because so much of why people fail on a diet is their perception and their expectations going into the process. So you really, sometimes the diet fails before it's even started.
Yeah, you're speaking to the choir here. The first 4 episodes of this podcast were all about mindsets before starting a fat loss diet. So
Oh, have you read that book?
I haven't, but I wrote down the title because I want to read it now.
You will absolutely love that book.
I already know that actually. But anyway, I want to be really respectful of your time, and you've given so much value in this podcast. I can't thank you enough. And before we go, I'd like you to, I know you already introduced your businesses, but now this is the time where you can tell people where to find you. So what are the websites for all of those businesses? If you want to repeat the names, your social media links, and I'll put everything in the show notes for everyone to click on.
Amazing. So the best place if you want to message me about anything is Instagram at ESG Fitness.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want to go to my website where you can WhatsApp me or find out more about coaching, it's esgfitness.co.uk. There's also links to the nutrition course, which is eiqnutrition.com, and the mentoring program, which is afmentors.com.
Excellent. So I'll put everything in the notes. I am writing it down. And Emma, thank you again for being on the podcast. I really appreciated it.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Excellent. And listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in and for giving me some of your precious time. I will be very excited to bring many more episodes like this one to you in the future. And until then, have a great day.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.